wanted to get your thoughts on Tory defections to reform. I'm not going to ask you to comment on individuals. We all know the kind of people we're talking about. Some very big hitters, former ministers, leading conservative figures who've moved over to reform. That has caused a lot of debate amongst, I guess, some on the digital right. It's caused this a bit of anger because they're saying, oh, reform is just now a receptacle for people from the dying Tory party, and they're quite angry about it. But then others, including reform supporters, present it as proof that this is a party preparing for government, preparing for power, getting some, people with a lot of experience on board in order that they can make things flow if and when they seize the reins of power. What have you made of that? What is the sense within the Conservative Party, do you think, about those defections and I guess the impact they might have on morale in the Conservative Party and also morale in the Reform Party as well?
Yeah, I don't think these defections have worked out quite for either side like they thought they were going to work out. And maybe it was a function simply of, the way Rob Jenrick was sort of rushed into it in the end, and it all looked a bit kind of undermanaged. But I think the short run effect has actually been to kind of improve morale, bizarrely, in the Conservative Party, because it's kind of produced a kind of cohesion effect as they denounce defectors. And, I personally found some of the things said about Rob and Suella quite shocking, really. But it has had this kind of rallying effect. And in Reform, it doesn't seem to have, given them another fillip, particularly in the voting, polling. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe Reform just do well around election times, and it's winning elections that makes a difference. Not at this stage, not the figures they're presenting. So I think it's not made as much difference as people think. I mean, Reform definitely do need a cast of serious people who've been in government and agree with reform aims and want to do it better this time round. And I don't think they've been perfect in kind of everybody they've taken. But I do think it makes sense if you're trying to become a broad, genuinely conservative force on the right, that you're going to want to take people from the old dying, as they would see it, Conservative Party. And I think people got too anxious about this, really. The online right, the people around Rupert Lowe and Restore and the fringes. I mean, it's just, some of them actually have quite opinions I would strongly disagree with personally around ethno-nationalism and so on. But even those who don't go that far, I just don't see what the point is. You don't win elections in this way. What this country needs is a proper, broad, genuinely conservative party that wants to do economic reform and wants to rebuild the nation. And if you want to do that, you've got to get 40% of the vote, and 30% isn't enough, as Starmer is showing. Therefore, you need to bring in all kinds of people. And I think Farage knows that, actually. But maybe not everybody, on the new right, for want of a better term, thinks that.
Yeah, I kind of flit on this issue because sometimes I feel that Reform might be losing its mojo a little bit, and you sometimes find a big issue happening in the news and you think, where's Reform? Why are they not saying anything of substance or of great interest? And then I also sometimes think that Kemi Badenoch is rediscovering her mojo and actually has done incredibly well as a leader in terms of ideas and articulation over the past few months in particular. So, we don't know.
I agree with that, actually. I think she has, I've had exactly the same reaction as you, actually. Just over the last couple of months, the Reform have just been a bit less present. Some of the stunts have got less coverage. Kemi's have got a bit more coverage. They've kind of articulated a clearer set of propositions, probably, than they had a year ago in the Conservative Party and are getting some hearing for it. All that said, the Conservative vote in the polls has not moved at all,
Yeah.
really, over
Yeah.
this period. So maybe none of these things. They're just the sort of Westminster chattering class's view of politics and not real politics.
Yeah, but as you said earlier, it is very hard to predict and very hard to call, which is on one level exciting and on another level quite scary, because we might end up with a Labour Greens government, Deputy
Yeah.
Prime Minister Zach Polanski.
Yeah.
I did want to get your thoughts on a couple of other quick issues. Well, not quick issues, but one of the things people are asking about these new parties and also about the old parties is whether they can arrest the decline of the nation. And that's something you wrote about this week, I think. National decline, economic decline, also cultural decline. These are two issues I think that concern a lot of voters. I'm not a doomerist about Britain. I'm not, those American tweeters who say Britain is finished and London has fallen kind of get on my nerves a bit, but I do recognize what people mean when they talk about a sense of decline. And we feel it in everyday life. I think we feel it in our pockets, but we also see it on the streets. We see it in our engagement with society, a sense that Britain isn't what it was. So when you use a term like national decline, what are you thinking about? And what are some of the ways we might reverse that in the coming months and years, I guess?
Well, really exactly what you describe, that we're a zero growth economy basically at the moment, and the growth rate has slid down and down for 20 years and is now at zero, and that is the cause of quite a few things we're seeing. The general shabbiness of daily life, the underfundedness of public services, the potholes, all this kind of thing. These don't happen by chance. They happen because the economy is not growing. If we had grown at the same rate as we've been growing before 2008, we'd be about 40% richer, and doing all these things would be a lot easier. So economic decline is definitely part of what we're seeing around us. I do think there's been a cultural decline. I struggle for the right word. I think, the sense of nation, the sense of cohesion, the sense of the cultural and communal bonds that pull together a nation state, that in some sense we're all kind of in it together. That's not the same thing as saying the state is the driver of those things. A lot of these have historically had nothing to do with the state at all. They're about kind of just people getting on with their lives in a successful way. But I think we have had a sense of decline of the nation state, and actually in some ways in Britain it's been worse than elsewhere. I think obviously EU law and the general sort of dissolving of nations in the EU has been a bit part of it. Here, I think devolution, the sense that Britain is a kind of contingent partnership of four nations rather than the single nation state, the ambiguity about the status of Northern Ireland, all these things have contributed. And then, of course, mass immigration has been a big part of the issue, and things like just not doing things that contribute to national pride. I mean, the rundown of the Defence Force is the most obvious one at the moment, but not teaching history, not a kind of approving of British culture. All these things kind of go together to, produce a sense that, I mean, I've said before that it's just this sense that Britain is just all the people who happen to be standing on the island at any given moment, rather than any real sense of a kind of national project and faith and belief. And we've got to do these things. We've got to try and fix these things. And I think they go together, that, as I said, economic decline makes it harder to deal with cultural decline. It rubs people up against each other all the time. In a zero growth economy, you become desperate to hang on to what you've got rather than think that the cake can grow and you have other opportunities. And then, people will not put up with all the churn and change of free markets unless they feel they're part of some community that ultimately kind of stands by them and has got their back, at least to some extent. And all these things have decayed. And that's why we are where we are. It's going to be difficult to put it back together, but I believe it can be done. It needs a bit of leadership. It needs telling people that things are going to be difficult, but we can fix it. It needs people who are willing to take it on. And I do think Britain has got a bit of a history of kind of getting into a mess and then digging ourselves out of it. You can see the pattern a bit in our history, and I think this is one of those moments again. We've got to summon up strength to dig ourselves out of this again. I think it can be done.